the violent conflict between Israel and Hamas is one of the most important stories in the world right now. But for the press, it's becoming unusually hard to cover, even by the standards of war reporting, thanks to some highly controversial moves by the Israeli military. Adam Riley has more.
1 week ago, the Israeli military announced it was moving into Gaza, a huge development that made international headlines.
Israeli military officials say they have begun a ground assault into the Palestinian enclave.
In fact, that claim was false, but it led Hamas fighters to shelter underground, where they were then hit by Israeli airstrikes. Multiple outlets concluded Israel had effectively weaponized the press, but a military spokesman called it an honest mistake in the fog of war, a condition the Israeli military made worse the very next day. After giving a 1-hour evacuation warning, Israel destroyed Gaza City's Al Jalaa building, home to Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. Afterward, Israel said it was targeting Hamas, which has fired thousands of rockets at Israeli cities.
It's about an intelligence office for the Palestinian terrorist organization housed in that building that plots and organizes the terror attacks against Israeli civilians.
But that claim was sharply challenged by the AP, which had been in the building for 15 years.
We certainly had no sense that Hamas was there.
Now the AP is calling for an independent investigation and warning that as a result of the attack, coverage of the conflict will suffer.
This does impact the world's right to know what is happening on both sides of the conflict in real time.
At a moment when it's clear that official claims can't always be trusted.
Well, Susie, you've covered international issues before and ran a news division that did. Have you ever seen anything like this? The Israeli military is saying it wasn't an intentional disinformation about going into Gaza, but certainly attacking that building. I mean, are they certain Hamas was in there? I mean, the AP didn't seem aware of it.
Well, even if they were certain, there was a way to communicate to the AP that this was going to happen, right? Like if you really had that intelligence. And then there was a sort of a weird incident where they said they had shown the U.S. the intelligence, and in fact, they hadn't shown it. And the Biden administration came forward and said they hadn't seen it. I mean, I have seen things like this, but not in governments that claim to be or purport to be democratic, right? I mean, this is the kind of thing you see out of Syria, not out of Israel. And so, I mean, I thought this was just despicable, the sort of spreading of misinformation. But, you know, it highlights something important that we're seeing more and more of, which is you cannot trust government accounts. You should not just, as journalists, take sort of the word of people in power about what's going on, right? We're seeing that in Israel. That's not something we should have to be reminded of, but it seems like we do need reminders. Look at what's happening in America with all these cases of these black men where the police put out a statement and say, oh, he died of a car accident. And then 2 years later, like with Ronald Green, it turns out they brutalized him, right? We have to do a better job of not being stenographers, of actually verifying things when they're said to us. Let me say one other thing as a Middle Eastern journalist, because I think it's important. One thing I've been, sort of a related but tangential point is that I do think the coverage of this particular conflict has been more balanced than in previous conflicts. When I was growing up in America, to even say that you felt some empathy for the Palestinian plight was really considered very anti-Semitic, and it was extremely difficult to cover these issues with balance. And I think we're seeing more of that, and I'm heartened by that at least.
I mean, I think that this, Susie raises an important point that I'm going to echo about the police reports here in America and the whole trust factor and how much we have leaned on government accounts. And how do we not do that, particularly in a fast-moving situation as was there in Israel, in Gaza. So that, to me, is really kind of scary. I think there needs to be some sitting down among all of us, particularly people who are in those areas, to figure out how to stem or to figure out how not to be as manipulated. I have to see that we're probably going to be somewhat manipulated given the circumstances. But this is really something that I don't think we can just let pass as one incident, that I think it ought to be investigated. We need to have some more facts, figure out what happened, get the tick-tock on it, and then figure out how we're going to respond as a result of this in the future.
Look, I think that, throughout history, politicians have always manipulated the media, certainly not at this scale. But you see things like information being released at the White House or from other government officials on a Friday late Friday afternoon in the summer, so that, any information that we put out isn't really heard by the audience, and certainly not with the same kind of impact if it would be put out at a prime time moment. And so there's always been this effort by politicians to, in any way that they can, use the media for some other kind of gain. Again, not making a direct parallel to what happened in this case, but now echoing what everyone else has said here, that it is quite disturbing, at this level. And what it does raise is the importance of all journalists to really always second guess information that we used to be able to take pretty much as gospel truth. And that's been the biggest problem, whether it's the local police departments or whether it's, national or international government officials.
I would agree with all three of you. Once again, it underscores the fact that you cannot accept official sources and you must verify as much as possible, which is hard in a fast-breaking situation. As far as the Israelis saying that the ground attack was underway and that being misinformation, hey, trickery and war and misuse of the media and disinformation is as old as wars are and as old as media is. Again, in a war, nothing is fair. I will say, and kudos to the Associated Press, that they were the only ones that did not go with that information initially and did not tweet it out and did not repeat the Israeli military about the ground incursion occurring. They sat on it. They didn't report it. They tried to verify it. I almost gave them a rave this week for that. I also want to point out that the Israelis have destroyed some other media outlets aside from AP and Al Jazeera in Gaza, and I think it does raise the question of whether or not they're trying to squelch the flow of information of what they're doing in Gaza right now.
Makes you wonder.